For the past decade, many commentators have talked about what they call the male loneliness epidemic. Surveys across Europe and North America have shown that men report fewer close friendships, lower emotional support networks, and increasing isolation compared to previous generations. The conversation has focused mainly on the psychological and social costs of loneliness. But there may be another stage emerging behind it, something darker and less discussed. What follows loneliness is not always reflection or healing. Sometimes it becomes rot. Loneliness, at its core, is a lack of connection. But when loneliness persists for years without resolution, it often transforms into something more corrosive: resentment, apathy, and emotional decay. This is what we might call the male rottenness epidemic. Not rottenness in a literal sense, but a slow erosion of motivation, empathy, and personal development. When men feel chronically invisible, romantically, socially, and economically, some begin to withdraw not just from society, but from themselves. Hygiene declines, discipline fades, ambition dissolves, the gym membership goes unused. The apartment becomes messy, days blur together between work, screens, and sleep. Over time, an internal narrative changes from "I'm lonely" to "nothing matters anyway." This process is not simply personal failure, it is often structural. Modern life has quietly removed many traditional roles that once anchored male identity: stable career paths, community institutions, and predictable family structures. At the same time, digital life offers an endless substitute. Video games, streaming platforms, algorithmic entertainment, and social media feeds that simulate engagement without providing real belonging. The result is a kind of emotional stagnation. Men who might once have channeled frustration into building something, a craft, a business, a family, instead drift into passive consumption. It is not rage that dominates this stage, but numbness, not rebellion, but decay. Yet calling this phenomenon rottenness should not be read as an insult. It is a warning signal. Rotten nature happens when systems stop circulating energy, when there is no movement, no sunlight, no exchange. The same is true psychologically. Humans, including men, require purpose, challenge, and connection to remain healthy. The solution, therefore, is not shame. Shaming men for loneliness or stagnation only deepens the spiral. The response must be reconstruction, rebuilding social spaces where men can cooperate, compete, and belong, encouraging physical activity, craftsmanship, mentorship, and real-world communities. Because the real danger is not angry men. History shows that angry men often change things. The real danger is men who stop caring entirely. If loneliness was the first symptom, rottenness may be the second. The question society faces now is whether it notices the pattern early enough, and whether it chooses to rebuild the structures that prevent decay in the first place.
We've all heard the headlines, the male loneliness epidemic. Young men reporting no close friends, surging isolation. A generation scrolling through screens instead of building real bonds. The U.S. Surgeon General called loneliness an epidemic back in 2023, and by 2025-2026, data showed young men in America among the loneliest in the Western world. 25% of men under 35 feeling profoundly alone on any given day. But what happens when that loneliness festers for years? When the ache doesn't fade but hardens? That's where we are now, entering what some are calling the male rottenness epidemic. Loneliness starts as emptiness, but unchecked, it turns toxic. Men without meaningful connections, friends, purpose, intimacy, don't just stay sad, they rot. The signs are everywhere. Withdrawal into endless gaming, porn, or rage-filled online spaces that feed resentment instead of healing it. Bitterness toward women, society, or the system blamed for their isolation. Self-neglect, poor health, addiction, aimlessness. Men dropping out of the workforce, not seeking help, dying younger from preventable causes. A slide into nihilism or extremism, where despair flips to anger or apathy. It's not just feeling alone. It's becoming someone you wouldn't recognize, cynical, entitled, hollowed out. Rotten at the core, why this progression? Loneliness has roots in old norms. Real men don't talk about feelings, so friendships stay surface level. Work, moving cities, digital life, all erode organic community. But prolonged isolation amplifies the damage. Without outlets for vulnerability, pain curdles into resentment. Social media algorithms push divisive content, turning personal hurt into tribal rage. Economic pressures, stagnant wages, job loss to AI strip away purpose, leaving men feeling irrelevant. And when romance feels out of reach, with surveys showing many single men desperately wanting commitment while women pull back, rejection compounds into worldview poison. The world hates men like me. The result, a feedback loop? Loneliness breeds withdrawal. Withdrawal breeds bitterness. Bitterness justifies more isolation. Rottenness sets in. This isn't just individual tragedy. Rotten men don't stay quiet. They lash out online or in real life. Higher suicide rates. Men already account for 80% despite being half the population. Rising extremism, broken families. Societies lose productive, connected people and gain sources of chaos. Health data backs it. Chronic loneliness rivals smoking for mortality risk. Heart disease, dementia, early death. Add rottenness, untreated resentment, addiction, despair, and the toll skyrockets. The loneliness epidemic was a warning. The rottenness epidemic is the consequence we ignored. It doesn't have to be inevitable. Men need permission and structures to build real bonds, friendships that go deeper than hobbies, vulnerability without shame, purpose beyond provision or conquest. Communities, mentorship, honest conversations, because if we let men rot in silence, we all pay the price. The question isn't whether the epidemic exists. It's whether we let it spread or finally confront the decay before it consumes a generation.
The male loneliness epidemic was a headline we all got used to. We saw the data. Shrinking social circles, the friendship recession, and the quiet ache of a generation of men living behind screens. It was a crisis of absence, but lately the conversation has curdled. We aren't just talking about men being alone anymore. We're talking about what happens to a person when they stay in the dark too long. We are moving from the loneliness epidemic into what some are calling the male rottenness epidemic. It's no longer about men having no one to talk to. It's about what they are saying when they finally do. 1. The fermentation of the soul loneliness is passive, but rottenness is active. Think of it like fruit. If you leave an apple on a shelf, it doesn't just stay an apple. It ferments. It becomes bitter. When men are cut off from healthy friction, the kind of friction you get from real-world friendships, romantic rejection handled with grace, or community accountability, they begin to rot. They fall into echo chambers that validate their worst impulses. They start to view the world through a lens of resentment rather than curiosity. The rottenness isn't a birth defect. It's a byproduct of stagnation, the content factory. We have to talk about the manosphere and the algorithms. For a lonely man, the internet is a lifeline, but the current is toxic. We've seen the rise of red pill influencers who sell a version of masculinity based on dominance, cynicism, and the commodification of women. This is where the rottenness takes hold. It teaches men that vulnerability is a weakness to be purged, and that every human interaction is a power struggle. It turns the lonely man into the angry man. It replaces the sadness of being alone with the dopamine hit of feeling superior. But superiority is a lonely mountain, and the air up there is thin. 3. The path out. So how do we stop the rot? It isn't just about getting out more. It's about social hygiene. We need to redefine what it means to be fine. Real strength isn't the absence of emotion. It's the ability to process it without turning it into a weapon. We need spaces where men can be seen without having to perform alpha caricatures. We need to move from I am owed connection to I am capable of building it. Conclusion. The loneliness epidemic was a tragedy of the system. The rottenness epidemic is a tragedy of the spirit. We can survive being alone, but we cannot survive being bitter. The cure for rot isn't just company. It's sunlight, accountability, and the courage to admit that we need each other.
We've spent the last few years talking about lonely men. Men withdrawing from friendships, from romance, from civic life. Men watching screens instead of building things. Men drifting. And there was something genuinely sympathetic in that conversation. Loneliness is real. It hurts, and it deserved attention. But something has quietly shifted, and we're not talking about it enough. Loneliness, left untreated, doesn't stay loneliness. It ferments, it curdles. And in a growing number of men, it has turned into something uglier, a kind of moral rottenness. Not dramatic evil, not villainy, something more banal and more corrosive. Entitlement dressed as contempt dressed as honesty. cruelty dressed as red pill, wisdom. You see it in the way some men talk about women online, not with desire or even frustration, but with a cold, architectural hatred. You see it in the influencers who've built empires teaching young men that vulnerability is weakness, that empathy is a trap, that the world owes them something and the only question is how hard to take it. You see it in comment sections, in group chats, in the quiet adoption of a worldview where other people, women, normies, anyone outside the tribe, are obstacles or prey. This is the rottenness epidemic. And it followed the loneliness epidemic like a shadow. Here's the mechanism. A lonely man is a man in pain. Pain demands an explanation. And the internet, efficient, algorithmic, ruthless, is very good at providing explanations that feel satisfying without being true. You're lonely because women have unrealistic standards. You're lonely because society was rigged against you. You're lonely because you were too good, too real, too honest for a world that rewards fake. The explanation lets it transforms a wound into a war. And suddenly the lonely man has enemies, and enemies are so much easier to live with than emptiness. But here's what those explanations never say. That loneliness, for many men, is at least partly a consequence of choices. Choices about how to treat people, how to show up, how to be worth knowing. Not always. Not entirely. Structural forces are real. But the pipeline from I am in pain to therefore others deserve my contempt is not inevitable. It is a moral choice, made step by step, rewarded by algorithms and peer groups, until it feels like common sense. And this is where the rottenness becomes an epidemic. Because contemptuous men raise the cost of connection for everyone around them. They make women more guarded, other men more defensive, public spaces more hostile. The rottenness spreads not like a virus, but like a broken window. One man who treats cruelty as strength gives permission to another. One influencer who monetizes bitterness creates 10,000 disciples. The culture of male rottenness is, at this point, self-replicating. What do we do with this? First, we have to stop confusing cause and effect. Male loneliness is real and deserves compassion. Male rottenness is a response to that loneliness, and it deserves confrontation. We do men no favors by treating their worst impulses as symptoms to be excused, rather than choices to be challenged. Second, we need to offer something better. The reason the rot spreads is partly because the alternative genuine connection, emotional honesty, mutual respect, has been so poorly sold to men. For decades, masculinity's critics diagnosed the problem without building anything in its place. Nature abhors a vacuum, and into that vacuum walked Andrew Tate. If we want men to choose dignity over contempt, we have to make dignity look like something. Third, and most importantly, men who are not rotten have to say so loudly. The loneliness epidemic was, in part, a silence epidemic. Men who were doing fine didn't say so. Men who had built good lives, good friendships, good relationships, they didn't make content about it. They didn't build communities around it. They didn't mentor the younger men drifting toward the dark. That silence was expensive. The lonely man deserves our empathy. The rotten man deserves our honesty. And the young man standing at the crossroads between the two, scrolling, searching, hurting, deciding, deserves our full attention. Because what he chooses next is not just his problem, it's ours.